Good afternoon. Thanks for everyone for attending today for our session on psychological health and safety at work. What we tend to avoid, but what we need to address. So today's session will explore the elements that we believe every business needs to be aware of to foster a supportive and thriving workplace environment. This webinar occurs in the context of the recent Safe Work Australia report, identifying trends in psychological health in workplaces. The report highlighted the changing impact of work-related psychological injuries, and specifically that during 2021-22, mental health conditions accounted for 9% of all serious workers' compensation claims, which was nearly a 37% increase since 2017-18. Additionally, the median time loss for mental health related workers' compensation claims was 4 times greater than that of physical injuries, and median compensation paid was more than 3 times greater than physical injuries as well. So as noted by the CEO of Safe Work Australia, proactively managing psychosocial hazards at work not only protects workers, it also benefits businesses by improving organisational health and productivity. Today's session is aimed to do just that. So today I'm joined by Rany Moran from Veritas. She will introduce herself and Veritas in one moment. But before we do that, just touch on a few housekeeping points. Firstly, today's session is recorded. So the recording will be available otherwise through MyHR and Veritas. Any questions will be recorded and be available afterwards. So please only use details that you're comfortable sharing in a public forum, and submit questions anonymously. And of course, if there are any questions, we will answer those questions at the end of the Q&A. So either submit those through the chat or the Q&A function, and we will sort of touch on a few things as we go through as well. And I think there were some questions that were submitted during the registration as well. So today's topics, we're sort of covering a vast range of things to do with psychosocial risk, peak performance, some government legislative changes around the right to disconnect, and looking at the sort of concept of flexible working broadly. Rany will take us through some recent high-profile turbulent work environments, I suppose. And then we'll sort of touch on some of the benefits of having good HR processes and how that can really benefit, particularly SMEs who we sort of tend to target around addressing these sorts of things, and then avoiding and confronting as well. And how, you know, we have a natural tendency to avoid these type of things and focus on, you know, busyness and other aspects of business, but really how we can, you know, skill ourselves to confront these issues as they occur. Rany, over to you.
Thank you, Julian, for the introduction. Hi, everyone. Welcome to this webinar, and thank you for joining us. But I think before we start, I just want to invite all of you to do it differently this time. I would love to invite you guys to just show some interaction and a little bit of participation, but of course, like Julian said, mindful of the confidentiality of this webinar. So you can use that Q&A function, and other participants would not be able to see your answers. So it will be anonymous. Right. What we want to make sure by doing this is that it's not going to be another tick box exercise, and this will show that you genuinely care about the topic. You might be wondering why Veritas, what makes us qualified to speak to this. Let me introduce you a bit about Veritas. We have over 40 years of combined clinical and business expertise in corporate psychology across Australia. So we stand at the forefront of workplace well-being. We are the leader in this space. And our team, a diverse blend of psychologists and industry consultants, including myself. I am a consultant and also a psychological counselor. With this, we offer dual perspective addressing both employee and employer needs. So what we do is we bridge the gap between understanding and action. How do we do it? We offer a comprehensive range of services, including psychological assessments, tailored wellness programs, and expert-led training sessions, because we want to focus on making psychological health and safety manageable for all of our clients. And what we do as well, we address and prevent workplace mental health issues, and we turn them into a strategic advantage. Our service aim to enhance productivity, employee satisfaction, and your bottom line, because we want to help you to create thriving workplace culture where every team member in your organization feels valued. So just a little bit about us, basically.
Yeah, nice. And my HR. So basically, my HR, our tagline is make it easy. We're basically the HR department for businesses that don't have one. So, particularly small and medium-sized businesses who, don't typically have the resources to have in-house HR. Those are the sort of businesses that we love working with, because, we can go from sort of zero and, not really having much in place from an HR standpoint to really putting in place really the foundations and the fundamentals around HR. And that's what we really like to focus on with our clients. So my HR, we have a platform for our clients to manage their employees, manage onboarding, performance reviews, managing leave, document storage, all of those sort of basic HR functions. And then in addition to that, we have an advisory service. So, it could just be a basic, query on leave entitlement. That's something that could take an employer, a couple of hours to get to the bottom of, because sometimes they can be more complex than they should be, but it's a real minor thing for us. Or it could be, a disciplinary process, something that an employer or a manager in a small business has never dealt with before, and that's where we really provide support with our clients. So it's a bit about my HR. So Rany, I think you're going to kick us off and take us through a few points around psychosocial risk.
Yeah, can't wait. Let's start. Right, so let's just first talk about psychological risk in the workplace. But just before I explore this topic for you, I'm keen to know what challenges you have experienced at work. Let's see if the Q&A function works now. I'd like each of you now to just put your answers in that Q&A function. The question is, what has been the greatest source of stress you faced in the workplace? It doesn't need to be where you are working right now. Could be workload related, or toxic coworker, or crossed boundaries. So use the Q&A function and then type your answer.
So we're getting a few come through already, Rany. I don't know if you can see those.
Amazing. Let's wait a bit more, Julian, and then maybe you can help me just reading out some of the answers, of course, anonymously.
Yeah, no worries. So they're coming through thick and fast. So we've touched on something there, Rany. So there's some definite themes around difficult team members, toxic employees or toxic co-workers. So that theme's definitely coming through. There's some things around managers. So sort of old school managers and that sort of thing. And then workload and deadlines seems to be a big one that's coming through as well.
Right. Thank you for participating, guys, and thank you, Julian.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, guys.
That's fantastic. It shows that you care, but also showing that you pretty much know the kind of psychosocial risk that is happening at workplace. So what are psychosocial risks? They are hazards that increase the likelihood of work-related stress and potentially leading to physical or psychological harm, including anxiety, depression, or PTSD. I ask you to think back to any personal experience that you have had in your workplace, maybe now or before. If you really think about it, that significantly impacts your happiness, right? That kind of toxic interaction that you have with your manager or overwhelming workload makes you feel undervalued, overburdened, or we're contending with a challenging kind of expectation as well with yourself or work. Let's explore psychosocial risk in SME workplaces. So let's just be specific now. Where we know in SME, limited resources and staffing often magnify this risk. Environments that are rife with negativity, conflicts, and blurred ethical boundaries significantly impact employee well-being. And that creates a pervasive sense of discontent and stress. Challenges for SMEs are notably pronounced. These can include excessive workloads, unclear job roles, poor work-life balance, and inadequate support resources. So managers in these settings can frequently lack the necessary training to address such issues effectively. A particular challenge for SMEs that we find is the absence of structured HR processes found in larger organizations. Of course, my HR is there to support you. That's fantastic. But if we don't utilize that well, this can result in employees having no clear path to report or address issues when conflicts arise or ethical boundaries that are being crossed. Specific risks such as harassment, bullying, or discrimination can be amplified as well. In a smaller workplaces, the absence of adequate reporting safeguards can leave employees feeling vulnerable. You can feel isolated and supported. Sometimes what can happen as well, power imbalances. This is very common in family businesses, Julian and everyone here, or small enterprises where manager is also the owner. And this can make the workplace complicated. Additional challenges can include a lack of feedback or recognition and minimal opportunities for employee to grow or advancement, and insufficient employee involvement in decision making. And I really need to emphasize here, Julian, that psychosocial safety is the responsibility of everyone in the company. The responsibility does not sit purely on the shoulder of HR or employees or managers or owners. Everyone in the company plays a huge role in their company psychosocial safety. It's said that the standard you walk past is the standard you accept. So that's important for us to understand.
Yeah, definitely. I completely agree with those points, Rany, for sure. I mean, I'm just thinking about from like a small team setting. I think this is often where a lot of these sort of issues stem from, is in that sort of setting. What strategies can be employed to mitigate psychosocial risks in that sort of setting?
Yeah, sure. A couple of strategies that I would recommend, actually. The first one that you can try and really implement strongly is open communication channels, like regular check-ins, open forums. Why this is important? Because this can help identify potential early on. So this is like proactive approach rather than only mitigating the risk when it happens, reactive kind of approach. Clear role definitions, because this can reduce uncertainty and stress and helping your employees feel more secure in their position. Work-life balance initiatives like flexible work options, that's also important.
Yep.
It's important as well to implement inclusive decision-making, involving everyone that is involved in the company's goal in part of the process of making the decision. Recognition and reward systems, because this can boost morale, but also reinforce the value of each team member's contribution. You can use also support like counseling services or employee assistance programs that provide professional support. Make sure, and we will discuss it a bit later on with this new regulation that will actually apply for SME as well, anti-discrimination policies against harassment or bullying, and ensure that policies are well communicated and procedures for reporting exist. And of course, training and development for all employees.
Yeah, right. Nice. You know, there's a lot there. I mean, you know, there are some sort of key, you know, examples of cost-effective strategies that immediately come to mind that SMEs could adopt.
Yeah. I would probably also recommend a couple of other cost-effective strategies for SMEs, like establish peer support group.
Mm-hmm.
You can do that because then everyone can share their experience and strategies for managing stress.
Yep.
It's pretty much like a community approach to mental health, Julian. Or you can use technology such as communication platforms to just basically facilitate open dialogues, online survey tools. There are some free ones or low-cost one, free resources available, and you can send that in like newsletter. Because often employees, they are not fully aware of what's available as resources out there. And if you do have some benefits, communicate that. Some of them probably are too overwhelmed with the stress or workload that they are facing. They don't have the time to utilize that. And plus, we need to make sure as well the benefits are not going to add into more stress.
Yeah.
So don't make it compulsory for them to participate as well.
Nice. Okay. Hey, moving on to peak performance.
Yeah, great. Fantastic. So let's talk about peak performance. But before we start, I actually want to start with telling you guys about this quote. Richard Branson once said, "Take care of your employees and they will take care of your business." It's as simple as that. So who here thinks that sounds simple? Just click yes or no in your Q&A column, guys.
This will be interesting.
This will be interesting. Right.
Just here we go. Starting to get a no.
Right.
Yeah, there's a couple of yeses in there. Yeah, it's
Well,
mixed. It's probably about 50-50, I'd say.
50-50, but let me tell you, if it were simple, we probably wouldn't be here today, right?
Yeah.
The truth is that the current state of employee well-being in Australia tells a worrying story. And this is reality that we have to embrace and accept. And let me give you the data. Despite 56% of Australian companies offering corporate wellness programs, a staggering 62% of Australian employees are experiencing burnout. So this figure shows us that there is a clear gap between intention and reality, and the shocking information as well that this epidemic of exhaustion is costing Australian business nearly 11 billion annually due to absenteeism, presenteeism, and compensation claims. A true commitment to a healthy workplace really requires more than just meeting a bare minimum legal standard, because we really need integrated approach in which mental health support is destigmatized and actively promoted. So today we will discuss some of the reasons why organizations may not want to confront some of the issues in workplace mental health. But one thing is undeniable here, Julian, is that the nexus between psychological safety, health, and peak performance in SMEs. Put simply, we know that a happy workforce leads to high productivity, innovation, efficiency, and financial result. What is performance? We know performance is the ability to know that what you are capable of doing, but also need an element of motivation, which is actually what you do, and an element of attitude, how well you do it. So it's so important to focus on psychological safety, because when your employees feel secure, expressing ideas and admitting mistakes, that's important for you to innovate, come up with creative idea, and solve some problems. So it's very important, and you can recognize that there is a connection strongly between investing in mental health and enhancing your business, enhancing your organization brand, and even attracting top talents, and then also higher customer satisfaction through that improved employee engagement.
Yeah, nice. I mean, are there any examples of how implementing, that come to mind, any sort of examples of how implementing, psychological health and safety measures can, not just improve the peak performance of the individual, but also the business in general, say a small, medium-sized business?
Yeah, absolutely. I mentioned earlier, introducing flexible working hours and remote work options flexibility. Why is it important? Because that will allow your employees to work at their peak times and balance personal responsibilities. And the result is higher job satisfaction and loyalty to your company. And second example, like implementing regular mental health workshops and access to counseling services. Why? Because then your employees will feel more supported in managing their stress and personal issues. Because we know if we have personal issues, we will carry that to work, vice versa. And therefore, you will see improved business performance. Introducing safety protocols that address both physical and psychological hazards that will significantly reduce workplace accidents and, of course, improves the overall safety culture. And this is very important, Julian and everyone, establishing a feedback mechanism so that your employees feel safe to voice out their concerns and suggestions. Why? Because that will result in increased innovation and then problem solving capabilities, because we know performance in SME often as a product of a culture of trust and collaboration. But a lot of us wants to avoid it, of course, because fear of legal repercussions or just simply a lack of know-how. So that's what we need to be mindful of.
Nice. All right. Right to disconnect. Yeah, so basically, I'll just jump straight into it. Basically, the federal government has proposed some amendments to the Fair Work Act, basically imposing a right for employees to disconnect from work. There's been a lot in the media lately about the right to disconnect and the potential impact it will have on employers. I think from today's standpoint, we're probably looking at it from a view of the employees and potentially some opportunities and benefits around imposing some limitations on work and work time and how that could sort of potentially positively impact employees and businesses as well.
I have a question though, Julian. In your view, how does the concept of psychological safety relate to the government's recently announced policy, especially with what you're talking about at the moment, right to disconnect?
Well, I think it really is a response to probably a few things that have happened in the last few years. I mean, work flexibility has really increased probably over the last sort of decade or so. I know throughout my career, it's gone from, basically in the office 5 days a week, 8:30 to 5:30 or whatever, and then sort of switching off beyond that to, COVID really taking that to a new level in terms of, work from home orders, in terms of, working outside of hours from time to time, in terms of, sort of general approach to flexibility across the board. And then, technology has really facilitated that as well. And then we've seen employers in response to COVID, adopting hybrid working practices, potentially closing down offices from time or at least downsizing office space with an expectation that employees would be, working from home a lot more. I think what we've seen as a result is it's sort of blurred the line between, work life and life,
Yes.
so to speak. And, I think this is just the government sort of pushing back a little bit on employers and sort of asking them really to reframe, how work is performed and imposing some limitations or some considerations around whether, working outside of hours is reasonable.
Right. So I suppose many of the people who attend this webinar would have this question, I'm sure. What should the employers do then to prepare? I mean, because at the back of the mind, it's probably thinking about, so how can we then manage the productivity and improve even the productivity? So what should we do as an employers to prepare?
Yeah, well, I think first is understanding. So it's basically the changes that employees will be able to reasonably refuse to monitor, read, or respond to contact that occurs outside of hours. They'll have avenues to raise concerns both internally and ultimately through the Fair Work Commission as well. But there are a list of factors that are deemed considerable contact outside of hours, and it seems pretty broad based on the initial information that's coming from the government. So it's looking at the reason for the contact, whether the employee is compensated for out of hours contact, the nature of the employee's role and level of responsibility, and as well as the employee's personal circumstances. So, these changes don't come in. Well, the initial there's an initial batch of changes from 26th of August 2024, and that's for small business employers. So really anyone who engages any more than 15 employees. And then 12 months after that, it also comes into effect for small business employers as well. So I think it's a real opportunity for employers just to review their arrangements. And is it becoming a situation whereby we're sort of taking advantage of some flexibility? And so perhaps it's time to review our practices around contacting employees outside of hours. So, starting from first principles around, what's the contact? Why is it occurring? Would it be considered reasonable under these amendments? Does the employee's contract support it? Is it reflected in their job description? Do we need a policy in place to really sort of, monitor or sort of regulate these arrangements as well? Those are probably the things that would be encouraging businesses to start looking at.
Yeah, and I think it's important as well for us to emphasize to everyone who attend this webinar that no SME is too small to overlook the importance of psychological health and safety, right? Because it's really at the end about recognizing and valuing every team member's well-being that goes beyond compliance. Because at the end of the day, we know that our people is actually the asset. But Julian, additional insight here, I think leadership plays significant role. I'm not sure if you are familiar with this proverbs that says that fish actually rots from head down. So you must have good leadership, because bad leadership can cause an organization to, go to a self-destruction, right? Or to decline in their performance or in their well-being as well. So that's very important for us leaders, managers. Yes, it's everyone's responsibility in the company, but we also must walk the talk, reassessing what works and not, but also then involve your team members in a good, effective communication system to also listen and hear their voice on what they are struggling with, and hear from them too. What's the input? So it's not only about seeing the regulation, but also processing and applying that in day-to-day process, I think.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, look, and I think as I said, there's been a lot of talk about these changes and their potential impact and creating uncertainty for business and that sort of thing. Having done a bit of reading up on this over the last sort of couple of months or so, I actually do think employers are becoming increasingly aware of this as an issue and sort of impact on employees in terms of, burnout and that sort of blurring of the lines.
Yeah.
There was some, reporting at the end of the last year whereby, something like 45% of employers reported that a formal right to disconnect from work-related communications outside of work hours is necessary in their organisation. So that's nearly half of respondents to that saying that they believe something is necessary. And 4 in 10 employers already have a policy in place around outside of hours communication as well. So, and I think we've seen in other aspects how, similar policy or changes have produced some productivity gains as well. There's been some stuff around the 4-day work week, and some studies around that, and it's really showing great things in terms of boosting employee mental health, and reducing turnover rates and numbers of sick days and employees experiencing burnout. So there really is an opportunity perhaps to sort of get more from less, I suppose.
Yeah, and trust in that process as well is important.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
All right, so flexible working is, it's a real well, it's really a flow on from the right to disconnect discussion. And, I think our point here around employee well-being and that sort of thing is, we see it really as a balancing act. Again, since the pandemic, we've seen a real uptake in flexible working practices. And, I think it's really a double-edged sword. In some ways, it really is a solution to some of those problems like overwork and burnout and stress from commutes and that sort of thing. But in some ways, it can also be a contributing factor. So, it can mean more hours of work. It can be merging that sort of work and life, and potentially less socializing with colleagues as well. So sort of tying it back to that right to disconnect, I thinking, working flexibly is great up to a sort of particular point. I guess our considerations today is sort of how that impacts from a psychosocial standpoint as well.
Yeah, I think we should share as well our insights to the audience, Julian. When you want to implement that flexible work arrangements policy, what are the key factors that we should consider, especially when we want to actually give the flexibility of working from home? What should we consider?
I think from a starting point, I still think there is a sort of a bit of a mentality from employers that if I can't see you working, it doesn't really count. And I've been doing a bit of reading lately. Cal Newport has a new book on sort of slow productivity, and he really talks about the concept of pseudo productivity and how sort of productivity can be difficult to measure in a professional services setting. And so we sort of have created proxy measures by just, if we're seeing someone work, that means they're actually being productive when it's not necessarily the case. And, those are really, that sort of overwork is, and we saw it earlier in this mini quiz that we did, Rany is one of those key contributions. So I think, there probably needs to be a bit of a change in mentality. I also think just need to be open in terms of what we talk about when it comes to flexibility. I was reading there was a study whereby they sort of were saying there's up to 300 ways to work flexibility, compressed week, reduced hours, job share, taking flexi time or special leave. There's a whole bunch of different ways that that could be that it could be done. But I think sort of a couple of principles I'd think about is one is first is just acknowledging the numbers. So 78% of people would not work for an employer without a formalized flexible work policy. So, that's a pretty high number. That just goes to show there's a real market for it. And in order to attract and retain talent, it's going to have to be something increasing that employers consider.
Yeah.
And I think it's gone from being a nice to have to a must have. It's a sort of tight economic market at the moment. There are cost of living pressures. There are cost pressures on employers, and perhaps there won't be the same sort of pay increases that we've seen in previous years. So from what I've been reading, certainly flexible working arrangements are definitely the highest strategy that employers in Australia at the moment are considering in order to retain talent.
Right. I guess also an important insight here in the process of deciding something and implementing that, to make sure that we implement this sort of like benefit purposefully and mindfully, don't operate from assumption. I think have an open discussion and be open to this change. I'm looking at some people commenting here, trust with employees more. Trust.
Yes.
That's actually big, an important key point here. And that shape the culture, and that shape as well the impact of the implementation of any benefits. And recognizing that sometimes maybe there are conflicting values between the employer and employees as well, about what does it mean with flexible work arrangements and what does it look like with productivity. So that's why I did mention a couple of times open communication, facilitate discussion as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with you. And trust is a big one. And I do think that there is an onus on employers to, if they do have concerns that there might be, someone may not be performing or whatever. I mean, be proactive about it. Whether that is having the conversation with the employee, or perhaps it's putting in place something whereby you can monitor employee performance better and actually assess, whether there is a performance issue or not, rather than just relying on a hunch. We have seen in recent reporting that sort of hybrid working arrangements has actually decreased over the last year or so. So there's been an increase in employees either working 5 days a week in the office or 5 days a week from home. And there's been a reduction of employees working a blended or a hybrid working week, both from the office and home. And I think that sort of, that bears out from my anecdotal discussions from people whereby employers have been much more stringent in terms of requiring employees to either come to the office or, just work from home full time, or they're making it clear in job offers going out to new employees that, it's sort of 5 days in the office, and sort of being less flexible than what they've sort of been over the last 3 or 4 years. So I think you're right. I think trust really is a sort of foundation of this sort of thing.
Yeah. And measure the impact of what you implement as well.
Totally.
Yeah.
All right. I think we can jump into turbulent work environments.
Yeah, and let me explore this topic for all of us. Why is psychological health and safety so topical now? One of my favorite quotes, it's actually from Maya Angelou, sums it up, right? The best that you can do is do the best that you can until you know better. Then when you know better, you do better. So knowing is not enough. We really must apply what we know. Willingness is not enough. We must really do it. And if we want progress, if we want change, we can't achieve that by doing exactly the same thing over and over again. We know so much more now that we did even a few years ago about the impact of mental health in the workplace. Under current health and safety laws, psychological risks are now treated equally to physical risk. Important changes to Commonwealth work health and safety laws come into place in April 2023, actually. And these laws prescribe how employers must identify and manage hazards and risk to workers' psychological health and safety. Safe Work Australia's recent report on psychological health and safety highlights the growing concern over work-related psychological injuries in Australia. This is fact. Maybe we can just turn the next slide, Julian. Right, so mental health conditions accounted for 9% of all serious workers' compensation claims. A 36.9% increase from 2018 to 2022. The median time loss was more than 4 times greater than all that physical injuries and illness in between 2020 to 2021. The median compensation paid for mental health conditions was more than 3 times greater than that of all physical injuries and illness. So with over 904.9 million paid annually in compensation for work-related mental health conditions in Australia, it emphasizes the legal obligations of employers to manage psychological risk effectively. And Safe Work Australia emphasizes that managing psychosocial hazards has a dual benefit, protecting workers and enhancing business performance and productivity. So let's examine some high-profile examples of turbulent work environments to identify the causes, the impact, and strategies for reform and prevention. Let's look at when psychological health and safety at work is done badly. Can we change the slide, Julian? Now, one high-profile case that comes to mind that ended up before the courts was the case of Sally Rugg, former Chief of Staff for Federal Teal MP Monique Ryan. Rugg basically alleges that she was dismissed for refusing to work unreasonable hours of up to 70 hours a week. This dispute led to a legal battle between, the organizations basically related to these working conditions. So who thinks asking an employee to regularly work 70 hours a week sounds reasonable? Can you click yes or no in that Q&A chat column, guys? Do you think it's reasonable?
So 70 hours a week?
Yeah, 70 hours a week. Do you think it's reasonable?
We're getting a lot of no's.
Right, it's not. So that case highlights significant issues around workplace culture. The challenges of managing work-life balance in demanding roles also is being highlighted here, and the evolving legal landscape concerning psychological risk in the workplace. In May last year, Sally Rugg was awarded almost $100,000 in an out-of-court settlement. So let's take a look at the wider impact of this case. Various Australian states have introduced or updated codes of practice for managing psychological hazards. The case could set a precedent for defining reasonable overtime, potentially sparkling further litigation across various employment sectors in Australia. And interestingly, as part of the federal court case, Sally Rugg's lawyers focus on the right to disconnect and challenge excessive overtime demands beyond standard, which is, I think, 38 hours per week. We have just seen updates to laws surrounding the right to disconnect. That's what Julian mentioned earlier as well. And let's have a look at another case. Can we change the slide, Julian?
Oh, I think
okay. Right, let's go back to that.
Yeah.
Sorry. So staying in the political sphere, unfortunately, the Australian Parliament has become one of the most high-profile examples of turbulent workplace we have seen in years, because it comes under scrutiny for the toxic characterized by abuse, harassment, and discrimination. So this prompted significant reforms, including implementing codes of conduct and establishing a cross-party parliamentary leadership task force. Additionally, the creation of a new human resources function and the independent Parliamentary Standards Commission are pivotal moves towards a more inclusive and accessible workplace. So if you look at the Respect at Work bill passed in November, just last year, places a proactive duty on all employers to prevent workplace sexual harassment. And this really marked a shift towards preventive measures rather than reactive ones. So this highlights the importance of what I mentioned earlier, leadership, legal reform, and cultural change in addressing and preventing workplace sexual harassment and discrimination. This is why, Julian, it's just so paramount for organizations of all sizes, from large corporation to SMEs, to really ensure that your team are fully equipped and trained to address and navigate these challenges effectively.
Yeah, no, definitely. And as you rightly point out, I mean, the same broad requirements apply to all businesses, regardless of their size, albeit there are different sort of standards around what's deemed reasonably practicable based on the employer's, resources that they have access to. We've just had a question come through just around reasonable overtime. Any suggestions of what reasonable definition is? And we get that question all the time, and there is a criteria for what's considered reasonable additional hours, and it includes things like the employee's remuneration, whether there is advanced knowledge that there'd be a requirement to work reasonable additional hours, the number of hours that they might be required to work, their personal circumstances and caring requirements and that sort of thing. Health and safety comes into consideration as well. So there is a long list of what is deemed reasonable in the circumstances.
Yeah, we have a question as well coming in asking about early warning signs, that what do we need to watch out for to know that, okay, our workplace is actually in turbulent at the moment, and how can we monitor that? Let me just share it with you. A couple of early warning signs can include if you have increased absenteeism and turnover of staff.
Yes.
If you recognize decline in productivity and quality of work,
Mm-hmm.
or if you recognize that there is a rise in your employees' complaints, change in your employees' behavior, like reduced participation in meeting, lack of enthusiasm, or increased conflicts. That's also a warning sign that you need to watch out. Communication breakdown, that's also the signs, especially when information flow becomes restricted, or if silos start to develop, basically, because this can lead to misunderstandings and lack of coordination. And then lastly, this low morale can become apparent through general sense of unhappiness. You can feel that, or pessimism and lack of team spirit. And be mindful, because eventually these issues can begin to reflect in declining financial performance for your company. So as I mentioned, how do you monitor? Feedback, regular feedback mechanism. You need to have performance metrics, just keep track of productivity level, and you need to actually implement absence management tools. You can use software or other online tools to just see the patterns that might indicate stress or dissatisfaction. Employee feedback is really critical tool for uncovering hidden issues and really knowing the effectiveness of existing policies, because that will allow you as leaders to tailor a solution. How do we collect feedback efficiently? Just conduct regular anonymous surveys that include questions about workplace culture or mental health, stress level, or you can implement like a physical or digital suggestion box.
Yeah.
When they can actually give feedback, right? Or conduct routine one-on-one check-ins, or focus groups that I mentioned earlier. But you need to act on that feedback as well, Julian, and everyone here. You need to systematically analyze the data collected. What makes your employee frustrated is that data or feedback is collected, but you're not doing anything about it. So use that to develop plans and communicate back to the employees your plans, basically.
Totally, I totally agree. And there's nothing more frustrating than participating in a survey or something and then not really seeing any, improvement from there. I mean, sort of back to our sort of HR fundamentals, and as sort of mentioned earlier, my HR, we sort of, really value making HR easy, and we see, there's a lot of jargon out there, and a lot of different things that employers can adopt when it comes to sort of HR. We really want to focus on our fundamental HR processes, because I think if you're an SME, even having these sort of basic things in place, you're probably ahead of the pack. To be honest, we get a lot of new clients who come on board, and there's not really a sort of onboarding process. There's not really any sort of meaningful performance review process, or they're sort of not really equipped on performance management, or the best way to go about offboarding employees who aren't a good fit, and that sort of thing. So we see real value in terms of just getting these basic processes in line and embedded within the organization. We see real positive impacts in terms of improvements to productivity, the culture of the organization, and the like. I think just quickly touching on onboarding. Onboarding has always been a bugbear for employers, I think. It's traditionally been a process that's involved a lot of paperwork and signing of documents and admin and that sort of thing. And I think increasingly what we're seeing is with the introduction of technology, as we can really use onboarding for its actual real purpose and make it really valuable. And that's for it's crucial in setting up the employee for success in their role. So something like 6 out of 10 managers have had employees leave within their probationary period, and 43% leaving in the first month due to poor onboarding. So employees actually having left roles because of poor onboarding processes. And we see real value in terms and using technology to automate onboarding to really make it more seamless, to enable everyone involved in the onboarding process to be notified of their role, in terms of welcoming the new hire to the organization, setting them up for success in terms of culture, in terms of meeting their colleagues, in terms of setting expectations for their role, reducing any uncertainty and that sort of thing. And those might seem like minor things, when we're sort of talking about other strategies that employers have adopted around employee well-being and that sort of thing. But really sort of getting those basics correct, I think really does a lot to reduce employee stress and anxiety.
Right. I have a question, Julian, for you. So let's just say we are a company that have limited resources. Can you share with us, I'm curious to know, what are the critical HR process that we need to implement first to make sure that you mentioned about healthy workplace culture for us who have limited resources, and what sort of common pitfalls that we need to avoid?
Yeah, I think the common pitfalls, if I start with that, is probably just not having anything in place, or not, thinking that I'm not like a large multinational, so I don't need to have these processes in place. I'm in touch with my employees, so I sort of know what's going on within the organization. So I think it's sort of again changing that mentality and seeing a real opportunity there, because if we're wanting to attract decent talent, if we're wanting to retain that talent, and if what we're saying is true around our employees really being fundamental to the business's success and performance, then it's really making the investment in those sort of, I think, basic processes around onboarding, performance management, setting goals with the employees or OKRs, involving them in the sort of broader strategy of the business and how they contribute to that.
Right.
Being proactive about dealing with, a lot of what we spoke about earlier or people raised earlier was around toxic employees and, toxic managers and that sort of thing. And it's like, well, what are the processes to address that? We all know that, or we've all worked with somebody who's, been toxic in the work environment, and it's seemingly like, nobody does anything about it. So it's like skilling managers up on dealing with those employees and being proactive about it. And so, there's some concepts out there like hire slow, fire fast. We really work with our clients to utilize probationary periods really effectively and really understand their legal risks and the processes around, how to go about dealing with, toxic employees. Do we have the appropriate policies in place? Do employees know how they can report matters? And that sort of thing. And increasingly, this sort of thing is facilitated by technology. So, again, we've got a platform. There are lots of platforms out there. And, so there's a lot of options, and the cost of this stuff has really come down, and the need to have somebody in-house managing it as a sort of HR person is not necessarily required as well. If you're on the smaller side of things, then there are options for you as well. I know, Rany, we're running out of time a little bit, so I might just rush through. I just wanted to talk a little bit about this Hertzberg two-factor theory. This sort of just goes to that point. So there's sort of two ways of looking at factors within the workplace. One is around sort of hygiene factors, and so these are the things that aren't necessarily going to. Well, I guess if you don't get them right, they will lead to job dissatisfaction. So, pay, job security, company policies, a safe working environment, sort of those basic things that you really want to get right, those sort of hygiene factors. So they're your sort of base. And then we look at sort of motivation factors on top of that. So, looking at recognition, achievement, promotion opportunities, giving employees greater responsibilities. And those are things that actually improve job satisfaction. And so that's the really good stuff to have in place as well. So just wanted to quickly touch on that. And we've spoken a lot about health, safety, wellbeing principles, and that sort of thing. And this these processes around risk management traditionally being applied to physical injuries, and how that's sort of progressively changing into psychological and psychosocial matters in the workplace. And we've touched on a lot of those. And, the reports that we've both referenced around, they're becoming an increasing aspect of workers' compensation claims. And they tend to be a lot more costly and complex and frankly, just difficult to deal with. So, sort of having those progressive, those proactive processes in place around identifying and assessing those hazards and risks and putting in place controls.
Right.
And I think you wanted to round out by just talking about avoiding and confronting.
Yeah. Hopefully everyone can stay until the end, because what we are giving as Veritas is that free well-being screener at the end. So just hang on a bit. I know we are running a little bit of over the time, but just hang on so you can utilize that free well-being scanner. Right, so avoiding and confronting, I think what I would probably say quickly here, things that you avoid in how you manage your people are the things that you need to confront first. We talked about it a little bit, harassment and then job insecurity, etc. But what we need to understand is that why do we tend to avoid those issues? Some of us probably think we are small, we can't afford this. You know what? Physical safety is more important than psychological, because some people probably have a cultural stigma surrounding mental health itself. So that's why you minimize the issue. So just be mindful and reflect to your own opinion and belief about that. Some people think cost as well, and too much effort probably required. Especially when you weigh in the urgency of, do I deal with the immediate challenge or do I focus on running a business in this very competitive market, right? That's just tough decision sometimes. But we know that first, it is going to be mandatory for us to focus on that in 2025 as SMEs. But plus, there is a strong correlation between that and then also performance as well. So manage that resistance and then question that resistance as well. Reassess again what you have at the moment. Just because you have been implementing for many years, it doesn't mean that it works. So reassess and ask what works and what not, and be flexible to innovate new creative way. And I mentioned earlier, you need to measure the impact.
Yes.
Set clear measurement system, set clear goal as well. Scalability as well. What works for a handful of employees might not be as effective as the companies grows, and then we need to be mindful of different needs and preferences as well, different cultural background. So be mindful of that too. So I guess adapting this proactive, like what you mentioned, Julian, rather than reactive. This is how we can actually move forward, and again encourage open communication and have this strong support system. And leaders plays a really unique position to set the tone of the entire culture, because sometimes your employee would see, oh, my boss is working extra hours, that's the behavior of my boss, and it's actually a bit toxic, and they would say, oh, this is the standard here. To be a boss, I need to conduct myself with working that long hours. So you are their role model as well. You can't preach something that you don't implement and show, basically. Right. And recent studies as well underscore the economic impact of not addressing psychological safety at work. So we know research from World Health Organization highlights that the stress at work create an estimated 12 billion lost working days annually. So with that numbers, with that information that we hear again and again, it's time to act. Right.
Nice.
Have any question, anyone so far, or Julian, about this?
I don't think so, Rani. I know we're just having a few people, it seems, having to leave. So I think we did want to share your workplace wellness
Right.
screener, just so everyone has the opportunity to to access that potential service. So maybe if you could sort of talk us through what's involved.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is really a powerful tool to assess where you are at the moment and which area that you need to improve in terms of a psychosocial risk in your company, whether what you have been doing, working or not. And not only giving free workplace well-being screener, Julian and everyone, what we are doing as well is that we want to give everyone a free discovery call with us Veritas to help you sort of like provide just 30 minutes kind of quick coaching or consultation to help what action needs to be taken and where the problem is, just to process the data from this well-being screener. And anyone who attend this webinar will also get a special discount in any services that we are offering. What we can do for you is, as Veritas, initial consultation, assessment, training or program development, implementation support, or even activation with your clients or with activation of your brand. We can help you with monitoring and evaluation as well, ongoing training and education, and group coaching or individual coaching. We can help you develop that feedback and continuous improvement sort of like system in place for your organization as well. And I know many of you probably think, well, we can do it ourselves. We can just self-read and then use self-help resources. Yes, and no, because sometimes having third party joining in the process, it will be able to give you that unique neutral insight from the perspective of employees and employer. And sometimes employees feel confident to be more open when someone else step in rather than their managers or HR people asking that same questions for the fear of that being included in that performance review. So take advantage of this office, and we are here and fully committed to support you and your organization as well.
Nice. Awesome. That sounds great. That sounds awesome. So everyone, I'll just leave it up there on the screen a little bit longer. Get your phones out, jump on that QR code, take advantage of the offer. We're just getting a few further comments coming through. I suppose we can jump into some Q&A questions now as well, Rany. So if anyone still in attendance has any questions, feel free to chuck them in the Q&A or the chat. We're happy to stick around and jump into any of those questions that come through.
Do we have any question that comes from the registration form, Julian?
There are, yeah, so there were a couple, so hopefully we've got, I mean, yeah, so let's jump into that perhaps. So there's just a couple. So sorry, just a couple of the live ones that come through. So one is about what happens when the owners are toxic. That obviously can be a little bit complicated. So maybe we can touch on that. We've had one about a great session. Is my HR a month-to-month service? It is a month-to-month, no lock-in contract with that one. There's pricing information on our website. But yeah, did you have any comments on owners that are toxic, Rany?
Yeah, that's actually great question. I hope the owners of your organization is actually attending this webinar. I guess this is why third party is important, and we can step in to solve that issues and provide that kind of education or awareness to the owners and then also the employees and bridging that gap. If your owners have been toxic, is there any way that you can actually work as a group to provide feedback or input, maybe in team meeting or somewhere? That would be great, because group message in a constructive way, of course, as a constructive feedback would be helpful. I would recommend that. But one thing that I know for sure is that toxic owners, if being confronted by toxic attitude from the employees, that will actually make situation worse. So first is gathering some anonymous sort of like input or open discussion would probably be a great help, or dealing with companies like us and my HR, and then also perhaps focus on what you can control.
Yeah, I think that sort of my take is, I think people who are sort of running a business, high achievers, very sort of motivated around the business and growing the business and that sort of thing, and managing employees and HR and employee well-being and that sort of thing may not be their forte. So, because they're so focused on, developing the skills to grow the business and do what they do really well. So it's perhaps just not front of mind. So I think you're right, Rany, having that external support is often really the way to go, because they just may not be aware of the impact. And so they're getting somebody else out, getting somebody outside who's objective, doing something like a wellness screener or something like that I think is a really good starting point.
Bring what you actually learn from this webinar as well, and report that back. Perhaps that would be a great idea. And I agree with you. Sometimes owners becomes toxic or people becomes toxic due to lack of awareness. But Julian, what's important as well, because I'm a psychological counselor, so I deal with employers directly in that EAP support, lack of knowledge on how to do things other ways.
Yes.
So they are so used to achieve things in life, or maybe that's how they were being raised, on solving problems that way, by being toxic, by being pushy, by creating unrealistic standard. That's how they motivate, and they don't know other way. So lack of
Yeah.
skills too.
Yeah, totally. If any other questions coming through, thank you. Great responses. Positive feedback. Thank you. Look, yeah, perhaps we can just touch on, and we've still got a few people in attendance, so we can just keep going. How much of an impact can stress be on mental health in the workplace? Rany, did you have any thoughts on that?
Of course. Let me just be straightforward. Expecting to work or live without stress is impossible. I like this quote by Dan Millman saying that stress actually happens when the mind resists what is. You can blame it to your boss, your wife, husband, your children, your client, but what makes stress is actually when your mind resists the reality. And so therefore you frame that situation in unhelpful way. And plus, many misconceptions about stress. We think stress is actually a bad word, right? So immediately we think, okay, when I have stress, that's bad. But the reality is that there is good stress and there is also bad stress. Good stress is good. We call it eustress. So good stress and good pressure is necessary for performance. That creates the sense of being challenged, being competitive, and then also excitement. And it's important for your well-being, because if you can Google after this, Yerkes, Dodson, and Curve, that tells you the correlation between pressure and then performance. When you don't have any stress and pressure, your performance is low because you feel bored, and that's not good for your well-being. Even being in a comfort zone too long, too much, that's also not healthy, because you will then be bored. So your mental well-being will decline. So you can still have anxiety and depression and stress, even if there is no stress. Now, what is bad stress? Bad stress is prolonged stress that is not being managed. So it's like chronic stress that you experience more than 2 to 4 weeks nonstop, and starts impacting your sleeping, your productivity, your communication, your relationship as well. And bad stress often happen when you are being unrealistic with your expectation. You focus too much on things that you can't control and what you don't have. What happens is that we procrastinate. This is usually what happens. Instead of confronting the issues, solving the issues, we want to solve the problem, the people, the person, or we turn away or against, not towards the problem itself. And of course, prolonged stress will result in burnout, anxiety, and depression. So I would encourage people to use stress as an information. What's lacking, what needs to be improved and changed, and work from that. Not just judge straight away, okay, this is bad.
Yeah, totally. And just going back to that Safe Work Australia report, it was the most common type of mental health condition claim for 2021-22, with nearly 46% of those sort of claims were stress-related claims. So, sort of the flow on in terms of to the workplace, that's a significant contributor to workers' compensation claims, and the impact would obviously be much broader than that, both in terms of employee well-being, costs to organisations, insurance premiums, impacts on other employees as well. So, big impact. Big impact of stress.
Huge impact. Yeah, it is mostly because lack of knowledge about stress itself, and then lack of ability to regulate and solve the stress. That's really the key here. You are stressed, right? Identify the factor and what's going to be the solution. What needs to be revised, basically.
Yeah, and so Ronnie, maybe we can touch a bit further on, we can still go. I suppose there's still some attendees who are clearly getting some value out of this. So let's keep going. So how can SMEs measure the impact of psychological health initiatives on their business's productivity and employee satisfaction?
Here is how you can get started. Number one, define objectives. So you need to clearly outline what you want to achieve. This might include, identifying sources of stress, right? Evaluating existing support system. Do you have any support system? Do you have any mentoring system that will be helpful in the process of onboarding, of course, and assessing your current policies of employee well-being. And then the second step is develop a framework. Common areas of assessment include workload management, work-life balance, interpersonal relationships at work, support and recognition, and clarity of roles and responsibilities. So those are the things that you need in developing a framework. And then the next step involve a range of stakeholders in the planning process. Who are they? Management, employees, and possibly external consultants. Like what you said, external consultants provide objective insights, but also expertise in this matter. And choose your tools and methods for gathering information. Are you more comfortable with surveys, interviews, or focus group? And reviews the data and act on it. Communicate the process and purpose and expected outcome of the audit to all employees to reduce assumption and miscommunication. So when you give that, tell them what is this for, so they can support this process and participate in it without being forced or without having a fear. That's how you conduct the audit, and then analyze the data and report findings. So report is not only, okay, this is what we find from what we conduct with you guys, but also suggest an actionable steps for improvement and communicate that to everyone, and monitor, evaluate, and make sure you have consistent messaging, not falling back into the old habit. Really consistent and not relapse.
I think a key thing that you pointed out there as well is just engaging or consulting employee about the solutions. It's like, if we're going to sort of change something or implement some sort of initiative to address it, let's involve the employees as part of that. People will become uncertain about changes, and if it's going towards psychological health or psychosocial health initiatives, and we definitely want to engage them as part of that process. I mean, a few other things come to mind around so basic measures around absenteeism, employee turnover, employee engagement scores. I mean, I was reading something around a business that had introduced like a sort of leave initiative. They sort of reframing sick days from sickies to healthies. So that's more of a sort of proactive way for employees to take some time off when they really need it, rather than waiting till they get sick and then taking sick leave at that point. And they were sort of talking about, part of their reasoning was some information they'd seen from IBM, whereby their view was they could see a correlation between employee engagement scores and customer survey feedback. So when employee engagement scores went up, as did customer feedback as well, and vice versa. When it went down, customer feedback. So there's a direct correlation there. It does flow into the business's performance as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you are actually conducting that sort of like review, what we said earlier, act on it.
Yes.
So we can call it whatever we want, but if it doesn't actually if it doesn't embodies in the practice of day-to-day operations, that just means nothing. That's just like ticking the box and then washing, right? Doing it because, yeah, okay, we need to do it, not because you genuinely care, and employees can feel that. So just be mindful when you are doing this meeting, explaining about this new policy and your action plan. Be mindful on the way you deliver it. and then be mindful on the psychological message that you are communicating to your employees while delivering the message, because they can feel it. And they can sense it when this is another, BS, or this is actually true commitment of the company, Julian.
Yeah, nice. Any other questions out there? Anyone still keen to submit something in the Q&A? Happy to maybe pick up one or two more if there's any live questions coming through. So just wait one moment.
Yeah, I like what you said earlier about proactively reading that data. That's super important. So if you see someone who has been accumulating their leave numbers, sit down and ask what has been the challenge.
Yeah.
Because yes, there is strong correlation between sales, customer service, and staff. They tend to make bad decisions, and they tend to actually be more sensitive with customer complaints when they are not taking proper rest and proper leave.
Yeah. All right, Rany, I think we've run out of questions here. We've had a lot of thanks, so it's been some positive feedback. So I think we could probably wrap it there, but certainly I just want to say thanks to everyone for attending. We hope it was an informative session, and if you would like some more information either about MyHR or Veritas, you can certainly find some more information about both of our products online.
Great. Thank you, everyone. And thanks, Julian, for having Veritas and me.
Thanks, Rany. Cheers.